You're in recovery though, right?
I am.
So
Yeah.
how much time do you have now?
So I will, knock on wood, have 10 years next month. Literally
What?
next month, like on this day.
What?
Yeah. So, and it's actually kind of cool because I think about it every year. I I went to, am I allowed to say names of things? Is that
Yeah.
okay? Okay. So I went to Timberline Knolls,
Yeah.
and life changing. And one of the people that was there, her name was Megan, but she did DBT. And so she's therefore DBT Megan only ever in my head. But like her birthday is today. Like I sent her a text like as I was driving here, and every year I'm just like, that woman, I've expressed it to her so many times, and I still like get teary like thinking of it. Like I was so, by the time I got there and actually said like, okay, fine, I'll go to rehab. I like didn't trust anybody, didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't really care. It was just kind of like, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, you're like, what are you going to do? Because clearly you can't function at work. People are calling you out, right? Like I've got
Yeah.
managers calling my parents being like, hey, this kid's not okay. And I'm like, my parents are also like, hey, get help. This is what you need to do. And so being the person that I was just kind of like, okay, whatever, this is the easiest route. And I went there, and I remember I went and I sat on the floor in her DBT room. And I refused to like participate. I like sat in the corner, sat on the floor. It was like day 2 of me being there.
Yeah.
And I just cried like the entire time. And then like when group was over, she sent like everybody else back to like the lodges. And she was like, no, I'm just like, I'll stay here. And I remember she sat on the floor with me, and like she brought tissues, and I was like, here we go. Here's a therapist that's going to be like, let me fix you. Let's start talking. And she just sat there. And I was like, okay, what is she doing though?
What's
Like,
her
what?
game?
Yeah, now I'm really suspicious of you. You're not even playing the right game. I'm like, I don't know this one. And then she like, all of a sudden she like, I like stopped crying because you hit a point, and she like
Yeah.
hands me tissues, and she's like, you know what? You have a case of the fuckets. It's fine. Like we're gonna fix it. And I was like, wait, what? And she was just like, yeah, no, it's all gonna be okay. That's fine. And like, I don't know. Like, I think it was just the fact that there was no, like, no one had ever told me, like, you can't cry, you can't do this, you can't do that. But it was the way that there was no judgment. There was no.
It's like you were okay. It was okay to be where you
Yeah.
were. Yeah.
No, it was the first time that, like, I sat somewhere, like, completely broken, and, like, nobody was, like, explain to me what you're thinking. They were just like, it's okay. It like we'll deal with it. Don't worry about it. And so I, like every year I like think about that like as this date approaches, and like I'm always just like, oh, like you like just by being who she was, I was like, you made such an impact in my life, like not even like trying to be a therapist in that moment. Later on, we got into the therapy, but like,
Yeah.
in that moment, like, and I try to think about that with like all of my clients now, like as I come in, is like, how do I normalize like where you're at and like let you be there and like hold you in that space without trying to be like, let's fix it, because that was like a game-changing moment for me.
Yeah, for sure. But it's just like the striving to like get better, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's okay to be where you're at right now, but like let yourself feel this, and then let's move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what like I had done some DBT before. Like
What's DBT again?
Yeah, so DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. It was created by this woman named Marsha Linehan. I can go on for days. We literally, Megan would have us celebrate Cinco de Marsha because her birthday is in Cinco de Mayo. And so like we would have a celebration. It was a whole thing. But DBT, what it does essentially is like CBT says is like the basic therapy, right? Like CBT is like the grounding of everything. And CBT essentially says, here is a problem. This is what you do instead, right? Like it doesn't leave, there is space for, but it doesn't as much leave space for the validation and the like maladaptive coping skills that like people are struggling with, right? So like, for example, self-harm. It says cutting is bad. You don't cut. This is what we do instead. And it's like, breathe in lavender or whatever, your hold ice, whatever you're going to do. All very valid things.
So are you saying like DBT validates
Yes.
what your actions a little bit more? For
Yes.
example?
So DBT, what happened? So it was created by this Marsha Linehan woman, and she had been in and out of institutions and things her whole life. She ended up coming out later and saying like she was actually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and so she's also a clinician, and so she was like, I'm gonna create this therapy based on like my experience and people I've worked with, and like she picked people that were very treatment resistant, and how do I help them? And what she kind of found, it was originally founded like for borderline personality disorder, but they found it to be helpful in so many other things, because what it does is it takes both truths, even if they're opposing, and holds them as equal. So like that's why I can like look at a client and say like, you know what, like you using drugs, that was your coping skill. And like I can say that 100% without judgment, that was your coping skill, right? Like if you relapse, that makes sense to me. It was your coping skill. That's ultimately most of the time
It's
what
like
my
what
clients
you know.
will say kept you alive.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was like I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard like, well, it was either that or suicide. And
Yeah.
so like how am I supposed to look at you and say like that's bad?
Yeah.
Don't ever do that again, right? And so the thing I love about DBT, and I think like the thing that made such a big difference for me as I started to learn about it, was like, for once it wasn't somebody saying like cutting is horrible and you need to stop that. That's a horrific thing. It was somebody saying like, hey, I get it. That's how you've been surviving. How do we do something different? Mm-hmm. So there was no like invalidation of like, but that's bad, now we're gonna do this. It was like, that's
I feel like that's
option.
how a lot of almost rebellion comes about.
Yeah.
Like that's bad. Don't
Yeah.
do that. And
Yeah.
then like as like an addict, I feel like our nature is to rebel. Like
Right.
you tell me not to do that, I'm gonna do it.
Right. I'm gonna do it. I know it's hurting me. I'm gonna do it though because you said that I can't have both, right?
Yeah.
Like you have now said that I can't get better and still like have this as a thing, right? And so like I like when I look at myself, obviously perfectionism is not a diagnosis. However, the root of like a lot of my stuff comes down to like perfectionism. And so like then also if you tell me, and that's why like a lot of times too, I'll refer to it as like a recovery date. And I've done that with clients too, where like when perfectionism is your thing and you keep getting like, let's say you get a week, you get 14 days, you get whatever, and then like you slip up in one thing. And so like, say if you're someone like me and you're dealing with like substance stuff, you're dealing with self-harm, you're dealing with everything else, disordered eating, like all that kind of stuff, right? So let's say like, you know, you've got sobriety for like 10 years and then something really horrific happens and like all of a sudden you purge or something like that. I don't, for somebody that is struggling with so many ideas of trying to be perfect, that's a huge setback to like then say like, oh, do you have to reset? Do you have to do this? Do you have to do that?
Yeah, so you're saying like the recovering date is like,
when did you decide to change?
Yeah.
And I've absolutely done that with clients that have like, they've tried like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And a lot of times with substances, like I'm like, no, like we can't, especially like if it's like marijuana, alcohol, not minimizing, very dangerous, right?
Yeah.
However, I'm less afraid if you relapse on that than if you relapse on like heroin or fentanyl.
For sure.
I'm a lot more terrified if that happens, right? Like if it's alcohol or something, it's not great, but I'm still like, okay, we can try again. Let's go.
Yeah. It's still really, I feel like alcoholics are almost like a different breed though. It's almost crazier.
Yeah.
I think so. And like weed nowadays is being laced with fentanyl. Like I just had a friend like 2 weeks ago. Her blunt was laced with fentanyl. And she didn't even know it was a thing. She was like, whoa, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because who would think, right?
Exactly.
Like that was not the thing. It was like the party drugs, the pills, the things like that. And that's what, this must be the place just posted, like they post an article every day about something in the news pertaining to like substance, things like that. And they posted an article on that too. And I was like, oh my God, like now we've hit, like, I think it was in an edible or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, now we've hit next level even. Like, why are we doing? And then we hit the level with like, now they're putting like the tranquilizers in it.
More tranquilizers.
There's like, so people started being like, oh my God, like naloxone isn't working. And it was clearly an overdose. Like the signs were all checking out.
Yeah.
And what they started to find out is that like, yes, the people had the fentanyl and stuff in it, but the reason that it wasn't working was because they were also putting this like tranquilizer in it now. And so the naloxone won't work on that, you know, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Because now we're battling different things.
Wait, so why would they be what's the tranquilizer's purpose? To like not come back from an overdose?
It's stronger. Yeah. And I'm sure that there's some kind of economic, like maybe it's cheaper. I don't know how you get cheaper than fentanyl. Like fentanyl seems to be like bottom, dude. But yeah, it's a different rush. It's a different high, and you know, who knows why they do what they do, you know? Like, why are you, for example, like somebody that's trying to use cocaine wants to be up, right? So why are you putting fentanyl in it? That doesn't, like, there's no rhyme or reason behind what they do. You know, it's not like we're dealing with pharmacists.
Yeah. Yeah, they say they do that for it to be more addictive, but it's like, fuck, dude.
Well, and it is, right? Because like it's, you know, from everyone that I've talked to that's used fentanyl either on purpose or accidentally, like they'll come back and they'll be like, I have never had a rush like that. And I'm like, you died. Yeah. And they're like, I know, but hear me out. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, all right. So, I mean, it, you know, it absolutely, it works. And I remember when all that like first started happening and it first started like cutting in, I had said to one of my coworkers, because like I finished my degree and I did
oh yeah, what do you have a degree in again?
So I am in Michigan. I have a license as a professional clinical counselor. Mm-hmm. And then out here I am working towards that licensure part because California is insane. So my degree is in professional clinical counseling. Mm-hmm. And then I specialized in co-occurring disorders and adolescence. And then after that came out here and did a program at UCLA in substance use.
Nice.
Yeah. So cause it's always like been interesting to me. Like it's fascinating to me that like even in my own head, I'm like, I know that these things are bad, but like, I think I can control it this time. Right. And so like,
that's the delusion we live in.
Yeah. Like, no matter what the behavior is, right? Like even if you're looking at like disordered eating or like, or cutting or something like that, right?
Like I can do this like in a controlled, like healthy way.
Right. Like I can do it this one time and I'll just control it from now on. Like, right. It was just this one meal set me over the edge and I'll be okay. Like I just have to get through this one moment. So like, I'll just cut somewhere here and not think. And like the thing I always tell clients, because like people don't realize that like when you engage in self-harm, the same chemicals in your brain that get released during using drugs get released during that.
Yes, I've heard, I did some research on that.
Yeah, and so clients will be like, I just can't shake it. I don't understand. Like I crave it and like I don't get it. And you'll have clients that are, you know, using substances that are like, you don't understand a craving. And I'm like, no, actually they do.
Yeah.
Let's back up, because like it absolutely is like the same kind of rush, and people, unfortunately, like, you know, you get hooked and you trick yourself into being like, I can do it just this one time.
I had interviewed somebody just a few days ago and I was like, was cutting something like you instinctually felt like you had to do, like hurt yourself, or like did you like see it on TV, or was a friend doing it? And she said like it was instinctual, like I really wanted to hurt myself and I got like a release out of it.
Yeah, that's a lot of times like that's, people don't realize that it's like the same rush that people get like when they use drugs, or it's like, okay, everything is balanced now, is the same rush that happens like when you engage in self-harm. And it's, I actually like laugh about it a little bit now, like looking back. I have this one friend that's always like, that's so sad to me, and I'm like, I don't understand. But like in grade school, like I don't know, I was fine at school, but I didn't like being in class. Like I was bored. It's a big problem of mine. I'm bored all the time, right? So like I have to have things that like keep me engaged. And so a lot of times I would just go down. We had like I went to like a really small like Catholic school. We had this like sick room that was like essentially a closet with a couch, and like it was like across from like the secretary's office, so they could like watch you. Realistically, you were supposed to be sick. They would call your parents, yada yada. We got to a point where they were like, we're not calling her parents. This kid is not sick. Like, she just doesn't want to sit in the classroom. So, like, okay, fine, whatever. So I would sit there and read, essentially, and I would just read all day. And, like, the way that I got introduced to, like, even the idea of cutting was actually through my school library.
Really?
Where Harry Potter was banned.
Really?
But I found this book. And I remember I was in 4th grade and I like didn't know what to do with myself because I was in 4th grade and, you know, I don't know, life was rough. I guess. I don't know.
You started life was rough.
Life was rough. I don't know. I sometimes like and I've had to do a lot of work on that. I'm like validating my own experience because like if anyone looked at my life from the outside, right? Like I grew up in a really privileged situation. I went to Disney every year for my birthday. Like I never had to worry about things. Like I have parents that love me.
Yeah, and that shows that like your external situation has nothing to do with what's going on in you.
Yeah, and there's a lot I think that like I've learned along the years, but like for a long time like I would even like say to myself like, what are you making this up? Like, are you trying to make your life like why yeah. Because like I would meet other people and I would be like, oh my God, no wonder you do that. Like, that makes sense to me. Look at your life.
Yeah, like, for example, like, they have, like, this crazy trauma. Like, no wonder you're an addict. And then, like, with somebody who grows up, like, pretty privileged, food always on the table, roof over their head. Yeah, for example, goes to Disneyland every year. Like, yeah. It's like, why would you have a substance abuse issue?
Right.
That's kind of like a stigma in its own. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's, it's kind of like, it's kind of the same as like you where like it wasn't until I actually got into treatment that I was like, oh wait, I do have trauma. Like now I understand why I'm running from things, right? And like even in that, I like when I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna tell people, like I will like not the world, right? But like come see me in an AA meeting. I'm a lot more open. Like on things that are like in public, I'm not as much just because like clients watch them. And I'm like, you know, I feel like there's boundaries that should be there. But, you know, when I finally like reached out and said like, you know, this is what happened. And like, it was it's weird because like looking back at my life, I'm like, I don't remember a lot.
Yes,
like,
me too.
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing, right? Because I have these pictures.
Yeah, like, almost pictures.
Right. I have pictures and I have friends. Like I have friends from still like when I was growing up. And like I'll actually use them to fact check sometimes. Like, wait, we actually did this, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is a thing. And so like when that stuff started coming back, I didn't have like full pictures, right? And I knew it was stuff that like people weren't going to want to hear. Like people weren't going to want to acknowledge. And I remember I brought it up in a therapy session, a family therapy session, because we did that at the center. And the response back was, well, I've heard though that sometimes if people need to like validate something, they make up experiences. And like, could that be what's happening?
It happens. That does happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes your brain can change like memories. Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was something I had to say. Oh, with trauma, like, like there's no way I'm an addict. Like I grew up pretty like decently well. I would just compare my trauma to other people's. Like it's not as bad as theirs. So I don't have an issue. I haven't experienced trauma. I don't have PTSD because people have gone through so much worse. So that's like mine is nothing compared to what happened to you.
Right. And that happens all the time. Like we always tell, I think honestly, like that was one of the biggest like benefits of like my time in treatment was that like at the time, like now they're owned by an insurance company, so things look different. But at the time, Timberline Knowles was privately owned, and it was owned by this woman named Dr. Kim Dennis. She owns another place now, phenomenal woman. And I remember like I went in because I wasn't owning everything, right? Like I was
denial about a few things.
Like I'm like, well, this isn't really here, and like I just have to deal with this, and like the self-harm should probably kick it, like, you know, we'll figure it out. And I remember like part of we were only separated by age, right? So like there were adult lodges and then there was an adolescent lodge. That was the only separation. It was also all female, but there was not separation on like, these are your disordered eating people, these are your substance people, these are, you know, like whatever.
But it was like everybody.
It was everybody. Okay. And I remember like people would, including myself, be like, I don't belong here with this. Like, what do you mean? I don't belong with this. I'm not this way. Like, what do you mean? And I remember, like, and that's the part where, like, like we were talking about in the beginning with, like, the stigma thing, like, within ourselves, right? Of, like, not being able to, like, own that part yet, but, like, also, like, trying to, like, do that comparison of, like, well, I'm not that bad and I don't belong with this part, right? Like, I'm not going to the hospital because of my eating disorder. I don't belong here with this,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
And, like, I remember Dr. Kim, like, there was a conversation, like, on our whole lodge, like, about it, where she said, like, she was like, the reason that we don't separate is because you are all the same.
It's really, like, the same thinking and thought process, really. Yeah, and then, like, I'm just going into treatment for substance abuse, I'm going to stigmatize somebody that has, like, schizophrenia, for example.
Right. Yeah. And I remember her saying, like, we do not separate you because you are all the same. Mm-hmm. You just chose to respond differently.
Yeah. And different, like, coping skills.
Yeah. And it was such, like, a game-changing moment for me. And I think, honestly, like, what really helps me in, like, even my career now is, like, I can look at a client and I do not care what your maladaptive coping skill is. Mm-hmm. I don't care what your, like, diagnosis says, things like that. They're obviously all important to know and to develop treatment. But, like, I can see you as a human. Yeah. Because, like, when she, like, broke that down, I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, everybody here. And then, like, I remember after that conversation, like, several of us, I think there were, like, 20 some of us on the lodge, had, like, conversations about, like, oh wait, like, that is, like, when we share in groups, like, we actually are the same, but, like, you chose to purge and I chose to cut, or, like, you know, you chose drugs and I chose whatever else, you know, like, it, like, that was really a game changer.
Yeah. So when you went to treatment, that was the beginning of you working on your mental health. Yeah. And substance abuse.
So I had been like, in therapy and seeing a psychiatrist since middle school. Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
I mean, I think that this is one of the weird parts, because, like, that's the part where I say, like, I don't remember a lot, right? And so I know weird things would happen. Like, for example, my dad's mom and dad, like, my grandma and my papa, like, they were my everything. And so, like, I didn't go to, like, daycare or anything, like, growing up. Like, until I had to test into first grade because, like, I stayed at their house. Like, that was, you know, what I did. And I remember when my papa died, like, I refused to go to school for a period of time. And so, like, there's things that I look back now and I'm like, oh, there were warning signs. There were signs. But then I don't remember, like, I remember pieces of things, but there's, like, other parts that I'm like, were you just, like, dissociating your entire life? Like, what happened? Like, and so I don't remember. I imagine that it was probably just, you know, like, before cutting, like, my mom used to tell me that, like, I would, like, pull my hair out and stuff, like, when I was, like, really little. And so, you know, I mean, I think that, like, there was probably always just a level of, like, also, like, irritability and just, like, I hate everything.
Overall discontent.
Yeah. Like, that whole, like, restless, irritable discontent thing of, like, programs. Yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, like 100%. Yeah. And so I think that it was probably just also, like, there was mental health stuff in the family, right? And so I think that people were probably just, like, well-intentioned and were like, we're starting to see some flags and, like, we should send her. And so I remember, like, my parents tried also, like, I think it came, like, in between, like Columbine, even though I was not in Columbine, clearly, thankfully, had, like, a massive impact on me. And I was, like, terrified to go to school.
Dude, that affected so many people. Yeah. Dude, I remember there was a school shooting in Florida, and that made me, like, when I was a freshman in high school, that, like, I went to school every day paranoid.
Yeah. And I went to this super small, like, Catholic school, right? Like, everybody knew everybody. Most of the families there had some kind of military connection of some sort. Like, so, like, I mean, I can't say that you ever really, like, expect it, you know? Like, I don't think that there's, like, oh, I expect it in this specific one. But, like, you really don't expect it in, like, that scenario, right? And so, like, I had no reason to actually be, like, terrified. And then I was. And, like, I remember, like, I was always scared. Like, even to this day, like, I just did a career fair thing for my job last week, and we were on a campus, and like one of my friends that I work with went there, and I was like, where do you hide? And she was like, wait, what? But she's also been like, she's been in a shooting, and so like she was like, oh, I know where, I'll tell you. But like that's like I don't like, that's the anxiety that like I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you get out?
Yeah, it's like it's almost like a paranoia and just like overall fear thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like that happened, and then 9/11, because my dad travels all the time for work, and like internationally, obviously within the States, things like that. And he was gone on 9/11. He had an office in the towers, and so like his company, like they lost a lot of people. And thankfully he was in Florida. And I remember like I was in 8th grade, and I remember they turned on the TVs again, because like a lot of these families were military, right? So like it was definitely going to impact us. And I remember like the TV was on, and I was like, oh my God, my dad, like I didn't know that he was in Florida. So like I was like, oh my God, is my dad there? And then like nobody, because there was no, at that point in time, like emergency prepared plan thing. Like who would have thought, again. And so cell phones and stuff like weren't connecting. And so like we couldn't get a hold of him. Like nobody knew like what was going on. And that for a really long time, like that also, I mean, I still get like scared when my dad travels, and like he does it all the time. I'm a lot more like calm about it now, but like I remember like that shifted a lot in like my life, because then like his company grounded like everybody essentially, because like nobody knew what was going on. Obviously international travel was impacted.
Isn't that when the airplane security got more crazy?
Yeah. And so like and also because of the amount of people that they lost and stuff, like they were like, all right, we got to regroup and do whatever. And so my dad started like working from home. And that like also like shifted everything, because I went from like having a dad that traveled Monday through Friday to like now I have a dad full time in the house, and he's working. And so like everything like shifted. And so I think people probably just thought like, we should get this girl some help. She seems like she's going through a lot.
Yeah.
But I didn't see a point to it.
Did you experience any stigmas growing up with like going to therapy?
Not so, well, yes and no. So like I would definitely have like, not within the family necessarily. Everyone, it would be kind of one of those things where I would be like, this person needs some help, but like they're not getting it, right? But it was never like, no, you shouldn't. It was just kind of like, well, I'm not going to, right? And I know that like there had been some therapy like with like my mom had been to therapy, but like I never really like heard, like it wasn't like talked about, like normalized, but it wasn't, there was no like stigma with it. But I remember like when I was in high school, and I went to a small Lutheran high school, and I was hitting a breaking point, and like it was like a lot of like really dark thoughts, like a lot of the self-harm, like all that stuff was like really ramped up. And I had we had religion classes because it was Lutheran, and I was close with like the teacher for my senior religion class.
Yeah.
And because we were so small, like it was normal that like you would like hang out with these people and stuff, like that was what you did. And I was also doing like, like I was trying to do all the things that like people tell you like get you back on track. And so like I was going to like Bible study on the weekend, and I would like go to church, and like I would do all these things. I was involved in all these things. And I went to him, and I remember I said like, I was like, I don't like, it was actually like one of the first people I was fully like honest with, and said like, this is everything that's going on. And like, I don't know how I'm managing this. Like, I don't know like what I do. And his response was, well, have you spent enough time in the Word? And I was like, I'm sorry,
In the ward?
Yeah, like in the Bible.
Oh.
Yeah, and not to discount any of that, because I do think that like religion and things like that, like I identify as Christian, like I still like I go to church and stuff like that, but like I also don't think that that's the only thing that can help you when you're struggling significantly with like mental health and stuff, right?
Yes.
I think it's a piece of it. It's not the full solution.
Yeah, exactly. Very
yeah.
true.
And so like when he said that to me, I remember I was super like caught off guard, and I was like, but I'm at school every day, which means I'm in religion class every day. I also go to chapel every day. I'm going to church. I'm in a Bible study.
And you still feel sick.
Yeah, I'm like, what else? Like my life is still spiraling. What do I do? And so like that was probably the first time that I hit like the biggest stigma part behind it.
Yeah.
You know, everybody else, there was not necessarily like a stigma. It wasn't like being talked about in like a positive way, but there wasn't like any kind of like discouragement for it.
Yeah, or like discrimination.
Right. Versus like when I showed up there and I was kind of like, what else am I supposed, what do you mean? Like, this isn't fixing it. And it's, you know, I mean, it's interesting to like reflect back on, because like years later, my cousin ended up going to the same high school. And she was like, oh my God, like, it's like, that was like, it still happens. And I was like, wait, what? Like, and it's not the school as a whole, like, it's like that person. But, you know, I think that was the part where I first like actually hit stigma and was like, oh my God, like, okay. And then I just shut down.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, if I'm not if I'm reaching out, like, it took a lot to like admit that to people, especially like feeling like always having this feeling of like you're gonna be in trouble, and then like to finally admit all that stuff, and like that's the response, like, yeah, I didn't get in trouble, but I also like, you know, in a way,
didn't feel seen. You didn't feel seen. Yeah.
I like, there was no actual solution. It was like, I'll find you some like verses that you can study. And I was like, I've read this, like, I'm in your class all the time, dude. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so like that was, you know, like that was a big thing. And so then, you know, it was a few years later, and finally, like, in, you know, at Timberline Knowles is when.
How old were you when you went there?
25.
Oh yeah, 25.
Yeah, my quarter life crisis. Yeah. On point.
Yeah.
Like I had a therapist that, you know, after, like, as I mentioned, I was working at Victoria's Secret, and it was a group of the women that I was working with there that called my parents and said, like, ugh, there's stuff happening. And like that took a lot of balls for them. Like, honestly, like, I'm an adult. Like, they could have easily been like, ooh, yikes.
Yeah, like, I'm not gonna try and help her out. Like, she's an adult, she can figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Or just like, you know, am I overstepping? Because like there's a lot of like, you're my coworker, you know, and like you're a grown adult, and like I'm calling your parents, and so it took a lot of, and I'm very like thankful for them now that they did that. At the time I was like, what the hell? But
for me to get treatment, it took me getting 3 DUIs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, sometimes it's just circumstances, or certain people are placed in your life at the right time.
Yeah. And that's like, now I'm like, I look back and I'm like, wow, like, you genuinely like cared about me as a person, or else like you wouldn't have done that, right? Because you could have just fired me and been like, bye, like,
she's
best
not
of luck.
She's not mentally stable enough to work here.
Best of luck. And like sent me on my way, and like you didn't. Like, they even offered me a job when I came back from treatment, and you know, I didn't take it because then I recognized how like impactful the like disordered eating world and that was for me. And
I wanted to ask you about the nonprofit you kind of work for a little bit. So what is that?
Yeah, so they're called This Must Be the Place. They're based out of Ohio. Got connected with them through a friend who was like, you're sitting around and you don't do well when you're not busy. And she works in the music industry, and she was like, this one keeps popping up at like these festivals and stuff with like other producers and things she works at or works with. And she was like, you know, why don't you like reach out to them and see like what's up? Like, they're small, maybe they're looking to expand, you know, whatever. And I was just kind of like, okay, but like there had been like a bunch of stuff that like happened, and I was kind of like in my own like depression world. Yeah. And she was like, I just need you out of this, and like you have a passion for this, and so like I need you to like do something. I take her advice for everything. So I'm like, okay. So I reached out, got connected with them. They were super, like, even though obviously I'm very far away from Ohio, they were super open with like, yeah, let's figure out how do we work together? Like, what do we do? Like, we are looking to expand. And so they've been really, really helpful with like, I'll be able to go out. I've gone to some like schools, I've gone to some treatment centers, and done overdose training, and naloxone training. And they're really great about like, hey, where are you doing it? Like sent me the naloxone for it so that I can give it to the people that we're training. And right now they are doing, I want to say it's 26 festivals across the US this summer. That's awesome. Handing out naloxone. So they are on the road, and popping up in a city near you. Yeah. But yeah, like just very like genuine, like down to earth, like people trying to do good things. And I've really appreciated how like they jumped on board, and there wasn't even like, they're like, no, let's get it. I was like, well, what do you need from me though? Because like I understand you're sending me, like, naloxone is expensive. Yeah. And so like,
it's really cool that all these nonprofits are like kind of just giving them out for free, and like the free training and everything. Yeah.
And that's what, like, that's actually one of like the questions that I get the most, because like it's kind of just like word of mouth of like somebody being like, hey, this girl knows what to do, and then like I get a random call or text from someone, and they're like, hey, can you come and do this, and how much do you want? And I was like, it's not I'm not looking for money, like that's not the intention. And so it's just kind of like a word of mouth thing that my CEO has been really supportive of, so that's been really cool. But yeah, I mean, I genuinely like value that nonprofit, because like I'm like, you're sending out boxes of like naloxone, which is expensive, to some person across the country, and being like, I trust you.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And so, you know, that's been really, really great. And they're out there just trying to like get it into the hands of people, and like I said, just like really down to earth, sharing like their own stories, and why it's something that's passionate for them, and trying to connect with like others in the community for volunteers and stuff at the festivals, and get it out there. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. Yeah. And there's a dog. There's a dog.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to put out there for, in terms of like mental health or substance abuse or anything?
There's so many things, honestly. Like, I think the biggest thing that I always try to share with people, whether it be like at a meeting or at work or wherever, is something that like somebody said to me way back, when I was first like trying to get my own recovery started. And it was just show up. And so like for me, what that means is like, no matter what's happening, whether you feel like you're having a good day, you're having a bad day, you don't know what's happening, you know, you have a lot of anxiety, just show up, because you don't know what could happen, right? Sure. And it can't get better if you don't at least come back. And I think that like that's one of the biggest things that I share with like clients is like, you know, even if you relapse, like I'm just as proud of you for walking back in that door and being like, okay, we're going to start over, as I am when you were like, hey, I just got 90 days.
For sure.
Right? Like, just show up.